Before the wins, before the SEC titles, before the national championships, there was a process. Nick Saban began implementing it the day he arrived in Tuscaloosa, and Alabama football, college football, has never been the same. That's the opening paragraph of that outstanding piece from our man, Al Blanton from Saturday Down South, who is on the Bud Light Hotline and joins us now on that Bud Light Hotline. Good morning, Al.
Good morning, James. How are you, man?
I am doing fantastic. I have been really, really looking forward to talking to you today, certainly since I called you last Friday. So before we really get into those ingredients as far as that DNA of a dynasty for Nick Saban, I think we got to have a reminder, Al, as you write in your pretty lengthy piece, but comprehensive piece as well, because I know when it comes to folks Josh's age and below, especially that come from out of state and may not be quite familiar with Alabama football prior to Nick Saban's arrival in Tuscaloosa, prior to that dynasty, that it wasn't always the same, even in very recent times for Alabama football.
Yeah, I mean, Alabama football was completely in the dumps. The game that I always point to is the Mississippi State game in 2006, and just how really crestfallen the Alabama faithful were after that debacle of a loss. And I wrote another piece for Saturday Down South called 38 Days, and really about the tenacity of Mal Moore and hiring Saban. But it really, thinking about how bad we were, really makes what Saban has done all the more incredible. And my focus from the very beginning when I started DNA of a Dynasty was just the how. How did he do it? I think a lot of people have, written pieces talking about recruiting, but I really wanted to get down and try to understand, exactly how he did it. One of the first things was recruiting. And then my second question was about the process. What is the process? We hear that so much, but what are the actual ingredients of the process? And so that was my focus.
So we'll get into those ingredients of the process later on, Al, but we're talking with Al Blanton, by the way, from Saturday Down South, DNA of a Dynasty. That outstanding piece as far as how Nick Saban built Alabama into the greatest college football empire of all time. But you mentioned recruiting, and the very first thing you mentioned in your article was Saban's recruiting trip for Mark Ingram up to Flint, Michigan, and just kind of tell that story as far as Gary Lee's encounter with Nick Saban.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I'm a former college basketball coach, and I know how difficult it is, on the recruiting trail. And so one of the things I wanted to, kind of explore was, okay, how does he have success, in these living rooms? What does he say to them? I mean, does he hypnotize them? I mean, what's the, there's so many people that are talking. What makes Saban's presentation and approach much different? And so, and I really wanted to start out by painting a picture of, what it was like for Saban to recruit a Mark Ingram. What was the recruiting process like for a guy named Barrett Jones? And so I started the piece with kind of a snowy day in Flint, Michigan, when Saban pulled up to the Flint airport in his private jet, and Gary Lee, the head coach at Flint Southwestern, who was Mark's high school coach, was sort of taken aback by that Saban had flown in on a private jet, and then just the utter confidence that Saban had while he was making his presentation to Mark. And the thing that Gary said that struck him was just how much passion and confidence was in his voice. And I understood that from, like I said, from being a former coach, and just how confident that you've got to be in selling your program and selling your product. And that's the thing that really stood out to me. But again, going back to what Barrett Jones said, Alabama wasn't Alabama yet. And so Saban had to kind of sell this theory of what Alabama football was going to be.
Absolutely. Al Blanton from Saturday Down South with us, and you're talking about the selling, at least of the program, before Alabama really went on their present run for the dynasty that they're on now, as far as those 5 national championships since 2009, rather. But just I want to get into this process because that's certainly something that Nick Saban sold from day one at that introductory press conference in January of 2007. But you mentioned one key ingredient in there as far as just figuring out the essence of the process, and just kind of tell us about that when it comes to discipline.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you absolutely boil down the process, the one word that comes to the top is discipline. And, Barrett Jones kind of confirmed that. And speaking with Corey Reamer, he kind of agreed that's what it's all about. We live in a world that does not underscore discipline. I mean, we don't talk about that much in today's world, but for the Alabama football team, for our military, it's the thing that's brought us tremendous success. And so it really comes down to discipline. Speaking with Trevor Mowad, who was a mental conditioning coach, what he basically said was, that his job in helping the team was to help the players understand, what it takes to be great. So that's kind of the first part, is an understanding of what it's going to take to be great. So if you want to look at the process as 2 steps, Coach Saban, Coach Cochran, Trevor Mowad, all the people that are in leadership positions at Alabama, they first want the players to understand what it's going to take to be great. And the second part of that is having the discipline to actually do that. So what Mowad said was, you're either going to do what it takes or you're not going to do what it takes. And so, you're at a program that is ultra competitive. It's the poster child for survival of the fittest. And so, you've got a challenging environment, and either you're going to do what it takes or you're not going to do what it takes. But the first aspect is for them to understand what that takes. And what's kind of cool about that is, I've used that with my employees. We can use that, and we can take that blueprint and we can apply that, in other phases of our life. And so I was really struck by that and fascinated by, those 2 ingredients of the process.
Speaking of the process, certainly Alabama has enjoyed the fruits of the process, but you also document in your piece that laying out and actually implementing the process wasn't exactly easy for Nick Saban when he first got to Tuscaloosa, as far as just the reaction on the team with a certain contingent of the players.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it was a culture shock. Here's a guy that comes in and has, the formula and the standards for what he expects, and the way he expects his program to run. And, that didn't, some people didn't cotton to that too quickly, and other people completely bought in. So there was in a way, a weeding out process. It was very similar to when Bear Bryant came to Alabama in '58. There was one of the first things that he did was just try to, weed out the guys that didn't want to do it his way. And so I think when you have a culture change like that, you're going to have a weeding out process. And you get to a point where, enough people theoretically you want everybody completely buying into the process and what your program is all about. But there was a culture change, the winds of change sort of sweeping over the program over a number of years. And so you saw that from 2007 to 2009 there was an adjustment period. But then you get guys in like Julio Jones, and you get the Greg McElroys. And I think one of the keys for Alabama is that, their best players have also been leaders. They've set the example. And, you just continually have guys like that like Dante Hightower that have come in and really led the team. And it's really good for a program when your best players are also your best leaders.
So when you talk, and to me, and this is a kind of a follow-up I want to get into as far as when the team, the program, as far as the process really started clicking and when the program started buying in as far as the players early in Saban's tenure, because for me, Al, when it comes to Alabama football history, just under Nick Saban, kind of that '08 team gets slightly underappreciated now when it comes to their role in the process of building Alabama back into the preeminent program when it comes to college football. And just kind of detail for us, Al, when that light started clicking when it came to that 2008 team, and really Alabama football in the bigger picture for as far as fully buying into the process.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, part of it was that we hadn't really beaten anybody. LSU had completely dominated Alabama in the 2000s. Auburn had dominated Alabama. Tennessee had dominated. And so we were way down the ladder. And so the first thing was getting a big win to give us some confidence that we could beat some of these teams. So, the game that just kept coming to mind for me was that '08 Georgia game. I think, the blackout game where the Georgia fans wore the black jerseys or wore the black shirts, and the team wore the black jerseys, and it was just kind of a very hostile environment. And, we went into that environment and it was 31-0 at halftime. And to get a win, under that sort of cloud of hostility, I think was a confidence builder for Alabama. And then you turn around, a couple months later and get a big win in Baton Rouge. So, those two games were games that I feel like that, the players started to develop some confidence that they could beat anybody. And so absolutely, it was building blocks. Alabama wasn't going to just, walk in and win the national championship. It was just, small steps forward, beating Georgia, beating LSU at Baton Rouge in a very difficult environment. Then we turn around and lose to Florida. We have the disaster against Utah, but they had enough confidence and they knew that things were turning, that they didn't let the Florida loss in 2008 and the Utah loss in December of that year. They didn't fold the tents. They knew they had a good team coming back. And then we saw the undefeated season in 2009 because of it. But you're absolutely right. The 2008 was such a great year in terms of turning the program around and giving Alabama a sense of confidence they needed going into 2009.
I want to ask you, I'm interested in getting your answer on this, Al. Do you think we have that 2009 national championship season without the lessons learned from the 2008 SEC championship loss?
I think so, primarily because, I got this from the players, that, in the off season, their mind was on Florida. As Ric Flair once said, to be the man, you've got to beat the man. And at that point, Florida was the man. Florida was the standard. And I think our players were kind of sick of that, and they wanted Alabama to be the standard. So again, we had grown to that level in the course of a year that, we're not the top 2 or 3 programs in the SEC to now we want to be the standard and we want to be the best. And so, they knew to be the best, they were going to have to tackle Florida, and just to have the confidence. One of the things that was interesting to me was that, Saban, from a mental standpoint, he never kind of raised the game to be bigger than it was. And so from a mental standpoint, that is a much easier hurdle to overcome. If he treats every game the same way and he doesn't raise the expectation level or raise the hype of the game, that seems a lot easier from a mental standpoint to overcome. So treating the Florida game and having the same approach going into the Florida 2009 SEC championship game as you would a UT Chattanooga, that doesn't, make the players mentally think, well, this is a huge hurdle that I've got to overcome, and we may not be able to do it. So that was an interesting approach, and something that I thought was very fascinating about the way Saban coaches. I mean, he doesn't raise the bar so much that the players don't think they can overcome it. So anyway, I'm rambling on about that, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the 2008 was motivation for 2009.
And something else, as we're talking with Al Blanton from Saturday Down South, DNA of a dynasty when it comes to Nick Saban's championship run of excellence here in Tuscaloosa since 2007. And talk about Corey Reamer's reaction after his final game as far as just how much with him and really with the program too, just that those concepts of the process and how much they had just synced in with him and really his teammates.
Yeah. The word that I really wanted to use, but I didn't use it, I don't believe I did, was brainwash. And I think that the principles of the process become so ingrained in you, it becomes such a habit if you buy into it, that you have a reaction very similar to Corey Reamer's after the 2009 Texas game. He was able to celebrate, but then he was kind of thinking, okay, what's next? And I really think that process, the thinking of the process has trickled down to the fans. I mentioned in the article that, we expect to beat LSU. And a lot of times, it's gotten to a point where, we expect to win the game, and the greatest emotion that we have after the game is just simple relief. Thank God we didn't lose, and let's move on to the next one. And so that's sort of the in a way the burden of the process is, being able to stop and celebrate, but then you have to move on to the next game. And for Reamer, I think there was a lot of delayed gratification in that. He looks back at his time and looks back at his time with tremendous pride. And so maybe he didn't get, to celebrate it, as much as maybe he would have liked, but now it's a source of pride as he looks back on what he's done. And you see that with a lot of athletes too, is, you look back on and have a sense of pride on what you've accomplished. So,
Al Blanton from Saturday Down South, also owner of the Blanton Media Group, the author of DNA of a Dynasty, with us on the Bud Light Hotline presented by Adams Beverages. So from here, Al, how long does this DNA of a Dynasty, how long does this dynasty, in your opinion, go as far as Nick Saban roaming the sidelines in Bryant-Denny Stadium?
I don't see it stopping anytime soon. I think, how long can Coach Saban keep this up? I mean, how long can he keep his foot on the pedal? One of the interesting things that Barrett Jones said was he's the most disciplined, and talking about Coach Saban, that he's the most disciplined human that I've ever been around. And just for him to have the utter and consuming focus on football is, it's remarkable. It is remarkable to be that focused, that dedicated, that committed. And as long as he continues to have that same level of discipline, and let's be clear. I mean, he models the discipline that he wants his team to have. And as long as he continues to do that, I think Alabama football will have continued success. I don't see it. I don't see the train derailing anytime soon.
You certainly mentioned at the end of your article, as far as there have been many imitators as far as trying to copy the blueprint as far as Nick Saban's process, but there's only one Nick Saban. And we all know, Al, and you certainly know back in the day when Coach Bryant retired, right before I was born, as far as this that legendary coach, that certainly had his DNA of a dynasty in the 70s. And we saw certainly after that Alabama had a lot of trouble trying to find that successor for Coach Paul Bear Bryant. So at least just from this article and kind of looking into a crystal ball at whomever way down the road might be Nick Saban's successor, what type of lessons that successor can take from this DNA of a dynasty?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think it's that you've just got to be yourself. I mean, yes, there is a process, but from a coaching standpoint, you've got to be yourself. The qualities, understanding what it takes to be great, that your players understand that, number one. Number two, that you have the discipline to do it. Yes, that's very important to the success of a program. But from a coach's standpoint, you've got to coach your personality. Kirby Smart has to be Kirby Smart, and Jeremy Pruitt has to be Jeremy Pruitt. Dabo Swinney has to be Dabo Swinney, and you can follow that. You can follow that, but you have to be your own person. Can somebody have the same success Saban has had? I don't know. To me, he's once in a generation. Alabama is blessed with what I call the double GOAT syndrome. I mean, we're arguing which of our coaches is the greatest of all time, and that just doesn't come around every day. And like I said in the article, you can hand somebody the blueprints and tell them how to do it, but that doesn't mean that you're going to have the same success that Saban has had at Alabama.
We're speaking with Al Blanton from Saturday Down South as part of that GOAT series for Al on Saturday Down South, DNA of a Dynasty. And I know you've got, and you even mentioned as far as one of your previous pieces as far as your GOAT series when it comes to the legacy of Coach Paul Bear Bryant. But just kind of describe that before we let you go, your GOAT series and maybe what you have for us in store in the future when it comes to this series.
Yeah, well, and I'm a freelance writer for SDS, and they did have GOAT Week, which is Greatest of All Time Week, and did a series on the greatest players and the coaches in SEC history. And so they wanted me to write two pieces, one on Bear Bryant, the other one on Saban. And so those are both, monumental efforts. And what do you say about those guys that hadn't already been said? And so that was my focus. I am going to continue writing Alabama football stories for hopefully for SDS, and I've also started a new sports website called Hall and Arena. We're going to be focusing on a lot of sports history. That's hallandarena.com. And so I will continue to do hopefully the long form pieces for SDS, and then going to be writing a lot for my new sports website too. So I just love it, man. I mean, I love sports. I love stories, and it's a fun job for me. And I grew up, and now I'm getting to interview a lot of those guys that I grew up watching as a kid, and it's just a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what's in store next for the next few articles that I've got.
Well, I tell you, when you look at stories, this is certainly a great story when it comes to the DNA of a dynasty, because I think you're even alluding to, and I talked about before you came on the program, I'm a big fan when it comes to the history of our country, the history of Alabama football, because there's a lot you can learn as far as future events that you can learn from the past. And this is one fantastic article that you have, and I've had a very, very good time talking about it with you. Thanks for joining us, Al.
You're very welcome, James. Thanks for having me on.